I call the meeting to order. Please be seated.
Mr. Chairman.
Member for Bordentown West.
Thank you. I understand we're moving to the appropriations to Cabinet on behalf of the Chief Justice, correct?
That is my proposal, sir, to take that vote now.
Okay.
To put that discussion.
Yeah, just two things as a matter of house cleaning. We agree OE1 and EI21. I think we can just take those two. I think just to maintain the separation between ourselves and the courts. I don't think we should be trying to block whatever they need for their staffing. So you can just vote those two, and then the remaining two is what we'll have questions on.
You have questions on OE 57?
And OE 102 will be the two. And so you can vote now on OE 1 and EI 21.
Okay, if it's convenient, okay, we'll go ahead and put those two items to the vote. All in favor of OE 1, personal emoluments for the judiciary in the amount of $206,000, and EI 21, judicial administration for $25,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Okay. The Attorney General is here, so we will continue.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just so that members know where we're at, we have to finish Finance Committee. We have to prepare the report. The House can't meet until the report is done. And then we go in and we do the third reading and the report. And we have then an agenda, which I think has opposition business for today. And then we have government motions, and we have third reading, and then we have committee stage of the bill. So members can make up their mind how much and time they want to spend in here. Tomorrow is Friday. I don't know, and I'm not telling anybody what to do, but I think we need to bear in mind the amount of business we have left. And if you don't want to go into the next week, which I think most of us was hoping, Mr. Chairman, that would not happen.
Yeah.
So, sorry?
I'm prepared to go into next week. I'm good.
Yeah,
You're young, you know.
You might have to stay by yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the intervention. That is correct, and one of the reasons why I'm trying to push this forward is that we really are up against some time constraints. I'd like to get this completed as quickly as possible. So, as we ask questions, please confine them, members, to the to specific appropriations at hand, and let's try to limit the wider questioning that has taken place thus far. So let's move to OE 57, executive bank charges, $10,000. Are there questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that we had raised quite a while back was the child support payments and others that are processed through the courthouse, is that people actually go into those commercial banks and paying $10 to clear some of those checks. And when some of them are like a few $100s and so forth. You okay over there, AG? Okay. Where some of the families are basically paying, when you're getting paid weekly with some of those checks, and your the $10 is being deducted out, you're talking over $500 a year for money that were intended to go to the children. I'm just curious in terms of this bank charges, what is that relating to in terms of what's driving the $10,000 increase? Is it a situation where government decided to absorb the cost, or I'm just trying to get a better understanding?
Mr. Chair, will you lead me, I ask the court administrator to respond? Thank
you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Suzanne Bothwell, Court Administrator, Judicial Administration. With respect to the question on the bank charges, these are for more of wire charges for wire payments. So judicial administration has increased the amount of processing of bills, payments. We do actually pay maintenance payments to clients now through the direct bank transfer system, the ACH. And so these are some of the fees that we are absorbing to process these types of payments.
So, okay, thanks very much for that. So, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Honorable Attorney General, just so we're clear, the normal $10 that's being deducted from some of these families who are getting paid in some cases weekly, where the banks are literally taking like $500 from them, by doing this electronically now, that problem is gone, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, theoretically, yes, there is an option for maintenance clients to receive their funds electronically through the ACH system. Those who have bank accounts, those who do not have bank accounts or who have decided not to sign up to the system as yet, continue to receive checks. And so therefore, we really are not sure how they're processing these checks. I'm aware that they go to supermarkets to process the checks. Judicial has been aggressively trying to onboard our clients who have bank accounts towards the system because it is easier for them. For example, during the COVID lockdown, clients were still able to receive their monies whilst they were under 24-hour curfew because our staff were able to process those payments. But we are hoping to increase the amount of clients that are using the system.
Mr. Chairman, and this is actually to you and your team, I mean, once again, this practice that the banks have of charging $10 to change government checks, I think with the amount of money and the amount of business that we're doing with them, I think we need to put the weight of the government buying power to have them really cut this out on government checks. Because if a family is still getting their weekly checks and paying $10 a pop to cash it, that's more than $500 a year, and that money is designed for the children. So I just want to reiterate my call in terms of the Ministry of Finance really kind of getting that bad practice for the banks done. Thank you. And holding it for 3 days, so in some cases the government checks. So, thanks.
The holding part of it, I do understand. I was told by bankers just last week is that they're now down to 2 days. And the hope is now that they will, by the end of the month or end of the year, they'll be down to 1 day only. That's the aim for them. But that's what I'm told. All in favor of OE 57, executive bank charges for $10,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. Ayes have it. OE 102, new courthouse project for $137,000. Questions? Leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my question is, every time we come here, we're allocating, proving more and more money for this courthouse. Is this the one at Scotia? Say that on the mic.
Yes. Mr. Chair, through you, yes to the honorable member. I gather this is some payment as it relates to the outline business case where that is being revisited.
Revisited, you said?
Yes, thank you, yes. The scope of the work is being revisited with a view to have it sort of reprioritized, in some aspects of it being reprioritized.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know why the Attorney General would open that door again. But I don't have a problem with him opening it. I'll push. Have we not done this before? How many times have we not done the business case for the courthouse in the last 20 years? But more importantly, in the last 2 years or so, 2 years, on this Scotia building?
Because we didn't get the funding that the team requested, that we had to reevaluate the scope of the.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that because there was some issue with the amount of funding that was requested as against those that were appropriated, the business case had to be revisited to sort of recalibrate it to reflect the funding that was actually appropriated.
Mr. Chairman, I know I'm getting old and might be weary too, but my memory tells me that we discussed this extensively when that building was bought, and we appropriated money for the renovation thereof. In particular, it might have been 3rd and 4th floor, and then, which was phase 1, because of the staff needing more space. So we split the business case up in different phases. Or
Mr. Chair, through you, sir, I gathered that, the money was really to retrofit the building for purpose. But I will ask the court administrator to elaborate on what transpired. With your leave.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the funds that were requested, the outline business case broke the project down into 3 core phases. 1A, which was supposed to be some of the early works renovations. 1B was supposed to renovate the rest of the building, because there are 4 floors on that building, and it was to cater both for accommodation of staff and also the creation of 2 courtrooms. The renovation was also to incorporate significant MEPF changes, because the structure is about 40 years old. So in total, the requested budget that would have been made during the budget preparation time was about 16 million on average. And what was granted or submitted to the LA and ultimately granted was more along the line of 8 million. So when the budget was finally approved and the outline business case team reconvened, we were advised that they would have to take another 3 months to review all of the renovation works and the scoping of those works to try and see how they can match it down to the actual budget we received for the years 2020 and 2021. Unfortunately, COVID came, so that review did not take place, and we were not able to make a Section 11.5 in time. And we are here because I believe that we were advised that we had to come to the Legislative Assembly to receive the additional funds to allow for the 3 months worth of work of the OBC team to take place, so that final recommendations can be made in a manner that is scaled down to meet the actual budget that we have, as opposed to the budget that was originally presented to the government.
That's a business case.
For you, Mr. Chairman, the Outline Business Case Committee.
Maybe I've been out of this too long. Your business case outline, whatever, looks for value for money, i.e., the scope of the works, whatnot. Then the take off on that project works in tandem, which says you're going to need 30 pieces, 5/8 plywood, whatnot. When you change the scope of that project, it's not another business case, it's another review of the works then. So you're saying we're going to pay people to do a business case for a different takeoff to match the lesser funding that we had?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it is the same committee. The final report was in a pending state. So when the budget actually came back, the decision of the committee was to revisit the original proposal against that was still in a final draft state before being presented to Cabinet for final sign-off. And then to, as you say, match the funding and the revised works and scope of works for each phase. So that is what has, sorry.
This new, Mr. Chairman, this new term of outline business case is obviously a money-making scheme, because if you're going to change the roof on your house and your original proposal with material is $1 million and you only got $500,000, you don't need to do another business case for that roof. What you need to do is find a contractor to give you the cost of it reduced at that, and do a takeoff to find out how much material you need as opposed to that and the type of material. But we're doing a business case too, outline business case as well on all these projects in government. Because an outline business case would have justified the 16 million. I'm confused. That's not hard to do, but that's not how I understand projects to work.
Mr. Chairman, sorry. I think not to get on the issue here, because I don't think anyone will doubt that a new courthouse is needed. I think just from a governance standpoint, and the reason why we're here today, I think maybe the issue here, I mean, because the description that we're given is funding required for outline business case. And I think in this situation, the fact that the project, we already know what we're going to do. I mean, the outline business case as a different set of rules is almost like a pre-project type initiative. In this situation, we already know we're going to fix up the Scotia building. So I think from that standpoint, it should be more a full business case, or pretty much that is the realm that we should be in. So I think I understand the frustration for the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, in that what we don't want to be caught up with is a paralysis of analysis where is outline business case. At some point, we just need to move forward. And I think ultimately that is what we're looking for. Now, I know this was an issue that was somewhat ventilated already at the Public Accounts Committee level, but I know other members may have their own concerns. And I think that is ultimately what it is that we need to look at. But I think this is something that needs to be dealt with by the government project management team, as opposed to the court administrator. And I think in essence they should have brought the project management team here today to directly deal with this. And I think it is something that we need to look at separately. But yeah, so I will just move on, but just to put that out there.
All in favor of OE 102, new courthouse project, $137,000, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. Ayes have it.
Look at the airport. $40 million over one.
That concludes the appropriations to Cabinet on behalf of the Chief Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to honorable members for the indulgence. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we're down to the final wire with the final appropriation for consideration. We return back to the appropriations to the Minister for Finance and Economic Development. OE 140, COVID-19 response and recovery for $40 million. Questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Member for Northside.
can we get a general breakdown of what this 40 million is made up of? And because everything popping up seems to be COVID related, but it comes in a different sub-aid. And I made the assumption when I saw the bill that 40 million was the totality of the COVID costs, because it was all extraordinary expenses. But every ministry is putting in something for COVID separate. So we need a breakdown of this, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just bear with me a second. The one that you did. Yeah, that one. Yeah, I might hand this out. So you want just hand this out? Or get Chris? Or get Krista? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as you know, honorable members were given a package of information stapled together early on when we started. There is a very early on in the package there is a summary level of the makeup of the 40 million, and for the benefit of the listening public as well, I'll highlight some of the main components of the 40 million. So honorable members will see that we start with a description that says for 19,258,000, that is described as amount of expenses incurred, one, as a result of services provided directly by the Health Services Authority, the HSA. 2, services provided by other entities but paid for by the HSA. And 3, amounts projected to be incurred up to the 31st of December 2020. and then there's a reference to all that detail of the 19 million to an Appendix 1, which follows that main summary page. Beneath that, Mr. Chairman, we see that there's a second row that's described as first payment to the HSA for PPE, swabs, testing, and other COVID-related expenditures for $4,640,362, and that further details of that is then shown by Appendix 2, which is then tabbed as Appendix 2. We see another line that says test kits from South Korea at a cost of 4.4 million US, which converted at 0.8375 was CI dollars 3,685,000. That's shown as Appendix 3. I think there's an invoice there. Mr. Chairman, additional expense. The very first page in the break that's entitled Breakdown of OE 140 is a table. And then we have additional expenses projected by the Ministry of Financial Services, Home Affairs, Appendix 4 for $3 million. Air bridge flights, Appendix 5 for $2,152,844. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause there to make a clarification that I think would be helpful to the public. I think from what I've been told that there's been quite a lot of commentary in the electronic media, if I can call it that, that it is, there's been some concern and upset that the air bridge flights cost the government $2 million approximately. That is not accurate, sir. As we all know in government, we have to have appropriations in order for government to incur expenditures. What this $2 million is for is to enable the government to have incurred the cost of those flights, mainly using British Airways to London, but to other destinations as well, to the Philippines, to India. So the $2 million is the cost of those flights, the gross. But if honorable members, just bear with me a second, Mr. Chairman. If honorable members turn to their packages of information, just behind Appendix 7, actually the reference number, the page number to the bottom right is 119, page number 119, just after the tab that says Appendix 7. At the very bottom table, Mr. Chairman, table 3 shows the flights that have taken place over a period of time. The very first one, the 6th to 7th of April 2020, we state there that the FCO paid for that flight. There was no cost to the government for that particular flight. The second one we show there, the 27th of April, between London Heathrow, Grand Cayman, and stopping in at the Turks and Caicos and going on to London Heathrow. The cost of that to government in US dollars was $257,665. And that involved, Mr. Chairman, the Treasury actually having to wire funds from Cayman, obviously, to British Airways in London to pay in advance for that flight taking place. But honorable members will see that to the right of that, the government did on this particular flight and all others beneath it, we did actually receive revenue, ticket sales for persons going on that flight, 265,721 on that flight. So the revenues actually exceeded the cost on that flight, and so forth throughout air bridge flight number 3, number 4, 5, all the way down to 8. In summary terms, Mr. Chairman, the gross cost to the government to $2,570,556 US dollars. That is what we're seeking an appropriation for in Cayman Islands dollars, and that's the number that I referenced on the initial breakdown of the 40 million. That translates into 2,152,844 CI. And the revenues derived from all of those flights was 3,308,589 US dollars. So whilst the gross cost to the government was a 2.6 million US, and that's what we're seeking the appropriation for. We did get revenue that exceeded those costs, and that revenue was approximately 3.3 million. And so overall, there was it's described here as a profit. We could use the word surplus, but the revenues on the flights exceeded the cost of the flights. And the difference between the two, the profit, the surplus, the excess, is $738,000. So the revenues exceeded the cost of the flights. It did not result in a net cost to the government. It did not. Mr. Chairman, if I could direct the honorable member's attention as well to the very top of the page. Table 1 speaks to the test kits, and it starts by showing that the cost of the test kits was 4.4 million US dollars, and it then indicates that there were a number of tests or kits that were sold. And Mr. Chairman, just a level of detail, but the one test kit allows 100 tests to be made. So a test kit is not the same as a test. One test kit allows 100 tests to be made. That $4.4 million was actually involving the purchase of 2,000 test kits, which then allowed 200,000 tests to be done. So we made sales to Bermuda, 12,000 tests, and the amount of monies that we got for those sales are shown on the far right. In that case, it was 264,000. So we sold tests to Barbados, 20,000 tests for 440,000 US. To exchange some tests with St. Lucia, we sold some swabs to the government of Jamaica. The government made a big sale of tests, 50,000 tests to the Elma Relief Foundation, which was 1.1 million US dollars. So the sales and of the tests, sorry, Mr. Chairman, was approximately 1.9 million. 1.9 million for the sale of tests. And when we take into account, Mr. Chairman, the donation, and it's publicly known, the donation by Mrs. Olde of 50% of the initial 4.4 million, translating into 2.2 million CI. When you subtract all the sale of the test kits and the donation from Mrs. Olde, this is indicating that to the government, the net cost to the government of the test kits and the tests was US dollars $286,600. So it was quite a reduction from the 4.4 million US that we started with as a result of sales and as a result of the donation from Mrs. Olde. Mr. Chairman, so if I could then continue on with the summary, back to page 1 in the bundle of information that honorable members have in front of them. We were at the air bridge flights, the 2,059,889. Management of isolation facilities, Appendix 6, cleaning, security, meals, etc. The details are in Appendix 6. $2,059,889, and then there is an amount requested for possible future costs, reference to Appendix 7 of approximately 5.2 million. So those are in broad descriptions, the makeup of the 40 million. Mr. Chairman, the honourable member for Northside, made, what is a valid point, that this is 40 million, and this is being accounted for or being requested by the Ministry of Finance, and our role, not seeking to dodge any questions at all. Our role in the Ministry of Finance was to try and collate some of the costs related to COVID, but it's certainly, the 40 million does not capture all of COVID-related costs. So I've subsequently just handed out to honourable members a single sheet of paper that details the total COVID-19 costs that honourable ministers would be able to reference back to the supplementary appropriation bill before them. So it starts with OE 140, which is what we're looking at now, for an amount of 40 million. And then all the other appropriations that honourable members have considered in the last few days, Cal 1 for 1.8 million, Cal 2, etc., TP 6 to 7 for the tourism workers, 15.6 million. Just picking out some big amounts, TP 80, the support for business initiatives, the 9.521 million that the committee approved earlier today. So all told, Mr. Chairman, as we will see, the COVID-related matters are $101,150,930. I would go on to say that these are the gross costs. What I ran out of time today to produce another schedule which could easily be attached to this that shows that there are corresponding reductions on other budget lines that would help reduce the gross cost of the 101 million by other reductions in budget lines. So this is a gross cost number, and obviously it does not indicate that this becomes actual expenditures, because as an example, some of the 40 million that we're dealing with includes an amount for future costs, and those costs have not been incurred as yet. So at a gross level, if the committee approves all of these items, and there's only one left to approve, which is the 40 million, the value of those gross approvals are $101 million approximately. But there are reductions of other budget lines that should be taken into account to make the net cost to government a figure that is less than $101 million. So I would say that the starting point for honourable members would be page 1 in the bundle, and there are references to appendices on page 1 to other appendices where the detail is provided, and then honourable members can peruse that information and possibly ask questions on that package of information, which I think it's in excess. I think the page numbering stops at about 120 pages.
You should have got this document from before to be able to peruse it. Perusing it as we speak is not going to very help us with the questioning lines. You should have got this document yesterday.
Member for Borden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've always believed that there's no future in the past, but that's just me. One of the things I want to touch on, because sunk cost is sunk cost, and I know we'll be drilling into those separately, but on page 117 is where really caught my attention. And I'm trying to understand the $75,000 per month to manage the isolation facilities. I mean, then I noticed there's also the hotel accommodations, which are separate down there, another $1,040,000. So I'm just trying to understand the $75,000 per month, what exactly is that cost to manage what facility? What does that $75,000 consist of? I do recognize also that's not your ministry. So if there's not someone here to answer it at this time, I can move on to my next question until they arrive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think we do have someone to help us with that answer. I think the honourable member mentioned reference
Page 117.
Title.
Catherine Dinspo Powell, Deputy Chief Officer, Ministry of Financial Services and Home Affairs. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe the question, which I appreciate, thank you, was that you would like a better understanding of what constitutes the $75,000 per month operating cost?
That is correct.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of support services that my cluster within the NEOC, the support services cluster, was responsible for putting in place to support the day-to-day functions of the isolation facilities. And those included catering, housekeeping and sanitization, security services, and laundry. And in addition to some of the meals for the catering items, we also provided some sundry items to some of the facilities, like cases of bottled water, toilet paper and paper toweling, etc.
Okay, and then the $1,040,000 per month, that's just straight, just room costs. So,
through you, Mr. Chairman, that is correct, sir.
Okay, and now the $30 per month for overtime costs at the RCIPS, what's driving that?
Where's that? I don't know. I wasn't responsible for that. Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'll do my best to answer for the piece that I'm aware of, again, given my remit as the cluster manager. There were some persons who were non-compliant with the order to quarantine at home, and arrangements had to be made for those persons to reside in a separate facility in the interest of the protection of the public. And during that time, the services of the RCIPS were utilized to provide security to ensure that there was continuing compliance after their placement there. There may have been other things that they contributed from a security standpoint, but that was definitely one. And then I believe at two of the facilities we had an ongoing police presence because there were a few incidents of attempts to enter properties by members of the public, etc. So perimeter security was provided on a 24-hour basis by the police as well.
$30,000 per month was the cost for that. Maybe the minister needed to put the $10,000 fine much higher. Thank you very much for that. And the last one on that page is $75 per month for direct costs to the Ministry of CPI. What exactly is that direct cost to the ministry? What does that entail?
Mr. Chairman, appreciate that the question asked by the honourable member. I'd make the point that these are obviously costs for the future and have not actually been incurred as yet. The honest answer is we don't know right now the the makeup of the $75,000 that the Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure would expect to incur in taking over this process. And I think this was intended from the 1st of October onwards. I'm sorry that I don't believe I have anyone from the CPI ministry that can give us the makeup of the 75,000 per month. I can seek to get that for sure.
Mr. Chairman, I have other questions, but I'm going to yield to give other members of the House a chance.
For Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Folks, I want to ask about the donation by Ms. Oli, and what is the government doing to honor her? I recognize there's many people who have been honored, rightfully so, but I have not heard, not that she would probably want one because of the caliber of lady she is, she did it from her heart, but I think it's only appropriate that we recognize her in the appropriate way. For somebody to take that large amount of money to help protect us should be recognized, and I don't recall the government recognizing her in the capacity of awards. Maybe it's because it's the governor's office that is doing it. Is there any intention to recognize her for that donation?
Mr. Chairman, obviously as a civil servant, I'm as more of a policy decision type question. I'm not able to really answer that directly, sir.
Member, I know that Mrs. Oli has in the past been recognized for her great philanthropy, and I know that she has been thanked quite profusely for her generosity in this case as well. So I don't know that there is any specific public intent, I should say, with regard to recognizing her at this point. But I mean, I think that would be a matter for the governor's office, because that is where the donation came through and the discussions were held with regard to the donation.
Thank you, Minister. And just a recommendation, I recommend or suggest that the government maybe consider having discussions with the governor's office about that because of what she's done. I think she's deserving. That's just my humble opinion, and I think many of us in this House share that. Moving on to the next question. Through you, Mr. Minister, can they, either through you or through your technocrats, we were talking about some future costs to COVID-19. Can you give us an idea of what areas of those future costs that we were expecting, why we budgeted over and above what we've already spent? Just to get an idea. Of course, there's going to be some recurring cost, but I just want to know, what list of things do you think will come in the future?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the honourable member for that question. Mr. Chairman, I just wait a few seconds because I see the honourable member conferring with a colleague.
Mr. Chair, through you, can you, my apologies, we did just go through much of that. Can you say what the total amount is? Because I don't want to make sure that I'm misunderstanding this, but is the expected future cost 5.2 million?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. That is one element, honourable member, and the 5.2 million. I think you would be referencing the page that we just left, which is page 117.
Correct.
But if you also look, if honourable members also look at page 3. And the page 3 is in the lower left this time. Page 3, the very first table, the penultimate row speaks to expenses from 1st of October to 31st of December, and there's an amount shown there of $5,961,099, and so that is an amount that could possibly be incurred with the help of the HSA, with testing of what is described here as projected travelers during that period of time. So the 5.2, Mr. Chairman, that was referenced first is future costs that could possibly be incurred in the course of managing the isolation facilities. This 5.9 million is, I would describe as being more testing. So if you put those two together, you're going to get like 11.2 million of possible future costs.
Thank you, sir. Through you, Mr. Minister, can you say, in respect to the profits that were made through the air bridge, which I was totally impressed with, I'm so glad to hear that we didn't have to end up spending or paying for the most of that, and we actually ended up making a profit, or making revenues, I shouldn't say profit. In respect to Cayman Airways flights that came through Florida, would the same principle arrive there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the honourable member is making reference to page 119 that we did discuss earlier. I think, Mr. Chairman, most of the Cayman Airways flights wouldn't conveniently fit into this table because I don't think the government got directly involved with paying for those. I think the ones that are shown on page 119 is where the Treasury is predominantly sending funds to British Airways. So it actually involves government paying out British Airways by and large for these flights. But the regular ongoing flights that Cayman Airways is undertaking does not involve the government itself paying Cayman Airways to do those flights. I must say, Mr. Chairman, that looking at page 119, there was a flight, I can recall at least one flight to Nicaragua that the government initially got involved with paying. I don't see that flight here, but I can say that that particular flight for certain was then subsequently 100% reimbursed by two not-for-profit organizations or individuals in the public. So I know that the net cost to government in that instance was zero. But I don't see that flight to Nicaragua listed on here, and the government was involved in that operation.
Thank you, sir. So just so I get that clear, it wouldn't have been an expense because Cayman Airways handled that in a way of like they would normally sell a ticket, hence the reason the Cayman Airways would collect the monies and pay for the cost, so it would be under Cayman Airways as opposed to core government.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So if Cayman Airways incurred a loss on that operation, the government hasn't directly stepped in and covered that loss. If it made a profit, it was all their profits. It was all their loss to keep.
Understood. Mr. Chair, I will concede to somebody else because I have some other questions. I just need to find the information first, so I'll concede to somebody else for now.
Other questions? Going once? Going twice?
Mr. Chairman,
Member for Northside.
on page 119 for the Health Services Authority is 16,570,663,000. That's what we have given the health services to buy extra supplies above and beyond the ordinary budget for the COVID crisis. $119.
can
Huh?
just bear with us a second, Mr. Chairman. We're just
Yeah.
getting some information to. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to let my colleague answer this particular question.
Mr. Chair, Matthew Tibbetts, Accountant General. Mr. Chairman, the amount noted on page 119 of 16 million to the HSA, that is the amount of funds actually paid out by HSA up to the 30th of September. A portion of that 16.6 million has actually been reimbursed by government. Up until the 30th of September, we'd reimbursed 4.6 million of that. The additional cost to HSA is a bit higher than that. Thank you.
Just to supplement
and
that,
this
Mr.
would-
Chairman, honourable members will see on page 1, the second row, it described as first payment to HSA, $4,640,362. Of the 16 has been repaid by government. So, Mr. Chairman, I think I need to make the point clearly that the HSA has played a very critical role in assisting the islands in this crisis, in this difficulty with COVID, not only with their expertise and so forth, but they've actually taken their own funds and made payments to vendors on the understanding and knowledge that they will be subsequently reimbursed, repaid by the Cayman Islands government. And so it has been quite a significant financial effort and contribution on their part, making actual payments and then awaiting the repayment by government for those funds that the HSA itself has paid out to vendors.
So why is we so far behind? And if they have spent 16 and so far you're only giving them 4.6? I mean,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must say I admire the honourable members' mental sharpness. One of the reasons, honourable member, is that we actually need the approval of this finance committee in order to make the reimbursement. So part of the 40 million, is to enable that to take place.
so none of this was covered in the executive order. This is not money that we've been told all along that this is all money that's already spent. So
thank you.
That's not entirely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, thank you, sir. Not all of the 40 million has been spent.
Okay.
And when members, if they were to look closely at their annual plan and estimates document, each supplementary that is requested of the committee, it has an asterisk beside it, and then when you look at the explanation of what the asterisk means, it then indicates some portion of the amount. In some instances, it's the same amount. So if the supplementary being requested is $100 and there's an asterisk there, in some instances, the asterisk will say that the entire $100 was approved by Cabinet under Section 11.5. In other instances, it may say, well, $20 of the 100 has been approved by Cabinet. And in that instance, then we would be enabled as a treasury to make the payment for the $20 element, and the other remaining $80, by way of example, we are seeking approval now.
Okay. Getting back to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, under Section 25 of the Public Management and Finance Law.
We were given a breakdown this morning of the 884,000 in terms of cots and ventilators and suction pumps and all that kind of stuff. How much of this 16.5 million has been consumed by the HSA as a result of COVID, and what's the how much of the stock is left, because I am only aware of one person who's the patient that's currently in the hospital that's on a ventilator. I'm not sure that anybody else was placed on a ventilator. And those kind of things don't have an expiry date on them. The PPE might have an expiry date, but basically we can get around that by simply putting them back in the autoclave once the package has not been broken. In fact, you can open them up and repackage them and get another year out of them by the thing. The question is that I would assume, and I could be wrong, that this 16.5 million has allowed a extra purchase of projected PPE equipment, right? Which would be above and beyond what the HSA would have budgeted for. But it also should mean that the HSA should not have to buy what it was budgeted for before if all of this has not been consumed to this point. And I'm assuming that there's going to be an adjustment budgetary-wise over the next couple of months based on inventory and consumption thereof. Because some of this should, I would think, that the kind of stuff I see here in your breakdown in terms of volumes of PPE equipment and all that was purchased, that should, having not had to use the expected amount of PPE because we didn't have 100 patients in hospital, we didn't have to go to the Family Life Center where we put up a hospital, right? There should be supplies here that could lead to a downward adjustment of the HSA budget in 2021 because you have supplies on hand that can now be used. So when would you be looking, Mr. FS, for that adjustment to come back up to recover some of your money?
Mr. Chairman, thank you again. I certainly followed your line of thinking, and I think there's, I can get the assistance of the CEO of the HSA, but I certainly think what you suggested, there's two routes, one of two routes we could take. The government can pay all of this now, providing the committee approves it. And if there's then a relationship between government for 2021 and the HSA, I think what you said is sensible, that we would expect that number to decrease because we're paying for it now. Or the other route could be we essentially approve the entire 40 million, but the practice of the HSA has been that they have actually been invoicing the Ministry of Finance for expenditure they've incurred, but they could also invoice on the basis of usage, and then essentially they would pay for essentially the stock that you talked about that has not been used in the COVID process. So it's one of two routes.
But I wouldn't want to put them in a cash flow difficulty, they haven't paid for it up front. But certainly there should be, you all should be able to, based on the consumption, make an adjustment down the road.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I certainly follow the line of thinking of the honourable member as well. But I just want to point out that if you refer to the Appendix 1, it gives you a breakdown of all of those items, and there's only a very small portion that would actually apply to any of the operational items that would be used on a regular basis. A number of these things we wouldn't foresee us using unless there was a second wave of the pandemic. For example, the extra ventilators, the projected costs as well for the testing. We wouldn't be doing the PCR testing on a regular basis, so that would not be a normal budgeted item. But you do have a point in regards to the PPE that would be used on a normal basis for surgery and that sort of thing. So there is a small portion that we could reconcile at the end of the day.
And I noticed that there's been some sales of some of the beds that we didn't need to Turks Island. You should be able to do the same thing with what would be an oversupply of ventilators that you currently have in stock at the moment. based on having to have them in case we need them. But once we get past COVID, which this too shall pass, we all hope, I think then we should be able to redistribute that expenses somehow.
Mr. Chairman.
I recognize the member for Newlands, then the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you. I wonder if, through you, if we could find out how many test kits we have remaining.
I guess we started off at the, he said kits. We started off at 2,000 kits or 200,000 tests. And then
So it's
we've done.
99,000, I think it was 99,000 tests.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, through you, we have approximately 99,000 tests that is still unused.
Thank you. Is there an expiration date on these tests?
Mr. Chairman, through you, yes, the expiration date, I believe, is the middle to end of April 2021.
Okay. And I'm assuming now that we've become very good at obtaining these, that there won't be any issues with supply going forward. Or is there a point where we're going to have to start looking to order more?
Mr. Chairman, through you, this is something that we're monitoring on an ongoing basis. We're actually looking to see, the projected number of flights that we're having to the reopening of borders to anticipate how many we're going to be using. But we do have suppliers where we can get additional kits, different types of kits, because as you can imagine, there's been, a lot of new supplies that have come into the market. So we do have other vendors that we're in conversation with that we can get access to different types, but the same PCR materials.
Thank you. That was actually going there next, is to ask if we're looking at more advanced methods of testing, quicker results, rapid testing, that sort of stuff. So I'm assuming that is ongoing.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, through you, yes, we're actually exploring some other kits that does have a quicker turnaround time, so we'll be able to get the test results much quicker in the future.
Member for Georgetown Central, then we put the matter to the vote. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Minister. In light of the total amount so far, and which includes projected cost of $101 million that is associated with COVID-19, can the Minister say what is our revenue looking like at the end of the third quarter of this year? Do we have those figures in yet? Because the last figures we had was had a deficit of 25 million a month average, but I think things are hopefully getting a little bit better now that we got things under control. So do we have an updated figure?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just bear with us for a few seconds. We're conferring to get the information. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll just attempt to fill in the time as need to locate the note that I think went to cabinet on Tuesday, and to say to honourable members that the plan and estimates document, which was tabled earlier, actually contains financial information for the entire year. The honourable members asking for information to the end of September, the third quarter, and also to say to the committee that the government is required by the PMFL to publish, to gazette quarterly reports, and the third quarter report needs to, which would be the quarter ending the 30th of September. That quarterly report cumulatively would need to be gazetted by very early in November, I think like the 9th, 10th of November. So we definitely have a legal obligation to gazette that, and will do. We're just continuing to search for the September results.
Mr. Chair, Accountant General Matthew Tibbetts. Mr. Chair, the revenue up until the September 30th period, that is from January 1st, 2020 to 30th of September 2020, the revenue is $604.6 million. During this time, we had budgeted to receive $672.7 million. So our revenue is short by $68.1 million year to date.
That's good. Through you, Mr. Chair, before COVID-19, what was the government savings? Do we have that figure just off the top of our heads? Reserves?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the honourable member to elaborate a bit more about savings?
The surplus, I'm trying to get an idea of, for common man to understand, simple principles of the math of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the surplus that we're supposed to have had in the budget, as well as whatever reserves we would have had, so we can understand, okay, we were losing this X amount for this year, that plus the reserves give us where we are.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, sure. As we know, essentially we got through to the first quarter of the year, January through to the 31st of March, without virtually any impact on that quarter because of COVID. So at the end of the 31st of March, the first quarter, we certainly would have been ahead of what we'd expected it to be at the end of that quarter. And then we locked down late March. So the second quarter, then we started to feel the impact, July to June, and then subsequently July to September, right? I think we're searching for the information in respect of the first quarter. But I know that, Mr. Chairman, I know that we were ahead. The actual results for the first quarter was ahead of budget expectations. And the honourable member mentioned before about reserves. I can tell the committee that the general reserves of the country now is approximately $104 million, and by convention, the use of the general reserves, the governments of the day, if they attempted to use the general reserves, have come back to the Legislative Assembly to seek the blessing of the Legislative Assembly to use those general reserves. So I'm sure any future administration would want to honor that if it became necessary. But it's not a legal requirement that a government get the approval of the LA to use general reserves. But right now it's about $104 million. The Environmental Protection Fund is about $56 million. I think we're still, Mr. Chairman, we're still searching for the March results to answer the.
While you search, in the interest of time, I mean, if there are other questions,
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
if you give me three more, that'd be finished. Just to finish up the point in respect to these numbers,
Okay.
I do apologize. Just to close off that line of the numbers, Mr. Minister, are you guys having a projected figure of final after the year end? Have you having projections for end of December 31st?
Mr. Chairman, the plan and estimates document which you tabled at the beginning of this meeting,
Gotcha.
that document contains an element of financial statements, and it starts at page 70. The balance sheet at page 70.
I got it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jefferson. This question now deals with food supply for the quarantining.
Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt the honourable member, but the Accountant General has, I think, not located the March results, but he's located other results which I think might be useful. So just give him a few seconds to speak to it.
Mr. Chair, through you. Thank you so much for the question, as it's something we're quite proud to speak on, actually. In regards to the cash, I'm going to give you the balances that include both the restricted and the unrestricted balances. So the restricted is around 170 million, but I'm going to give you both amounts, so the unrestricted and the restricted. We started January 1st, 2020 with cash balances of 522.3 million. At the end of the first quarter, which is the 31st of March, we had cash balances restricted and unrestricted of 659.6 million. By the end of the second quarter, and that's June 30th, we had 559.6 million. And we've just recently ended the third quarter, 30th of September, with $535.2 million. And again, that is made up of both restricted and unrestricted.
Thank you so much for that. Just to finish up my question, because I know my colleague wanted to ask his, in respect to the quarantining and the supplier for food, how many restaurants did we use to help supply with the quarantining facilities?
Mr. Chairman, we're just getting Ms. Dinsbell Powell to assist with the answer.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, when my cluster was tasked with the responsibility for putting the catering services in place shortly after the lockdown in March and the activation of the NEOC, contact was made with a couple of places, many of which had already sent most of their staff home or did not have any inventory on hand to be able to do meal preparation. We did start, I believe, the first isolation facility with food being provided by the Turtle Farm because they still had staff in place to work in the kitchen, and they did have some stock on hand. Unfortunately, they struggled to deal with the increase in demand after, I think, maybe the second flight arrived, and it caused inordinate delays to the delivery of the food, and also the food not being prepared to a safe standard. We were lucky, Mr. Chairman, in that when we reached out to Mise en Place, they had yet to release all of their staff, and they did actually have some inventory, and they agreed to provide us for 3 meals a day at a cost of $25 US per person. And so that was the arrangement that was put in place.
Thank you so much. So the answer is one restaurant then, or one supplier?
At the time that we handed over the function on the 30th of September, yes.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, So since things have kind of gotten back to some level of normalcy, have we expanded our restaurant options for supplying for quarantining, or is it still just that one restaurant, one supplier?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my team that was involved handed the responsibility for the supports for the isolation facilities over to facilities management in Minister Hughes' ministry as of October 1st. So I can't speak to what arrangements are in place at this point in time. Sorry.
Totally understand. I can't expect you to do that. Can you tell me how much money has been spent up to the point where you were in control of it with that one restaurant supplier?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have a detailed breakdown, and I'm also aware that my finance team, which consisted of the CFO in my ministry and the deputy, were also waiting for final invoices for September to come in, so I'm not sure whether the report up to September 30th was submitted or not.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, not giving the honourable member a precise answer, but he and all honourable members can get some indication of the level of the cost from Appendix 6. That would give us. It would not answer the honourable member is asking for a total, but it certainly would give a feel for the cost.
Mr. Chairman, I know sometimes my questions become difficult, but the reason I have to ask these questions now is I have a document is over 120 pages with figures in it, and I've seen it for the very first time an hour ago. And there's no way for me to analyze this appropriately to ask the necessary questions. Some questions I wouldn't even ask you because I can find it myself. But I can't digest, not even an accountant specialist as yourself would have been able to take and digest all this information that quickly. And our job here is to critique positively in respect to doing our job. So that's why I have to ask the question. Now, the reason I ask the question is now that we've gone back to normalcy, government's job is to ensure that we try to share the love of the spending across the island, because I'm hearing the figures of close to $2 million spent with that one location. And I can't confirm or deny that because we don't have the information before us. I personally believe at this particular point, particularly because there was discussions about the types of food, even though Mise en Place is an amazing supplier of food, but we are in a Caribbean country. And there are people who were saying, we wanted something more Caribbean. And there's a lot of local restaurants who could use the service. A little $100,000 for one restaurant, a little $100,000 for another one, that can meet the demands that are necessary for these quarantines. And I can't get these answers because it doesn't seem like everybody has the answers ready here for me. Or maybe somebody from a policy perspective can say, what is the intention now that the availability is done? We've got Island Taste, who's an amazing supplier of food, and who I know is ready. Are we giving them some of the pie, so to speak, in respect to government spendings? That's what I'm trying to say. I just don't want it all going in one place because it only goes to one bank account. We need to spread that love around. Can anybody from a government perspective speak on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the piece that I can undertake to assist with is to provide the report with the detailed spend for that one vendor up to September 30th, if you could give me the indulgence of doing so tomorrow morning.
No problem at all. I'd appreciate that. Mr. Minister, that's my last question, but I don't know if the Honorable Minister Mr. Hugh would be able to provide, because he's taken over since the end of September, to give us a direction as to what the government's plan is in food supply with the quarantines now that CPI has taken it over.
Mr. Chairman, I will seek to get the information. I have no details on that. I know that now that the home isolation is available, the demand on the government quarantine facilities have been lowered. So I will inquire and report back to the committee.
Thank you, sir.
All in favor? Oops, sorry, member for Baden Town West. I did acknowledge you.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman.
Then we go to the vote.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you and your team for collating all this information. As I said in my earlier line of questioning, there's no future in the past. And one of the things I am curious about, and I would like to get an idea, is with all that has happened with this pandemic, and clearly, if I have to give credit where credit is due, I think that we in the Cayman Islands did a far better job than many other countries. I would like to know what we're doing to collating lessons learned, information. So from that standpoint, if we do have future issues, future challenges, I mean, we have all of this information readily available. We may not need it in the next now, but in the next 10, 15 years, something can pop up. We'd have passed on, and at least there's something for someone to follow behind from a script. So I know we're still collating costs and everything, but my question in all of that is there a ministry or an area of government tasked with collating all the lessons learned? And because there's some things we admit we could have done better, but at the time we need to respect and understand the environment that we operate in, and we just need to make sure that for future generations and posterity's sake, that all of this and what we have learned is recorded in one central person. If we have to task someone to go and do it, to collect everything from every ministry, because this was all hands on deck, and to make sure that we have something for future generations. So you guys have collated all the costs, but I think someone needs to collate the entire story now. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, through you, just to, was there an...
The question is, which government ministry, agency, portfolio, or department or entity is now going to be tasked? Because we're still living through, I mean, yes, we have some level of normalcy in the terms of not social distance as much as we should, and wearing masks. But, you know, we still have a tourism industry that is still out. We still have a lot of people that are still struggling and having their own challenges. But what we need to make sure is that while a lot of this information is still fresh in our minds, that we take the time out to actually record it and write it down, so at least we start developing plans in terms of having something that we can respond to, maybe for not this emergency, but maybe other emergencies in the future. And so the question is, who is tasked with, or who's going to be the agency or entity that is responsible for collating all of this, the lessons learned, telling the story, so that, you know, whenever something like this pops up again, we know exactly what we can do to hit the ground running. So that's the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, per the responsibility that's conferred to the Director of Hazard Management through the Disaster Preparedness Law, we do have responsibility for a national pandemic plan. And I think we were fortunate in that we identified, probably now about 2 years ago, that there was work that needed to be done on that plan in particular. And we partnered with Public Health England and PAHO and some other agencies to begin that work in collaboration with our own medical experts like Dr. Lee and others in that team. And I believe, if memory serves, Mr. Chair, that as we went into activation of the NEOC, Public Health England was actually wrapping up what was one of their on-site visits to help progress those plans. And so I think in some ways, because we had had the foresight to start some of that work, we were poised somewhat to begin to respond. There are mechanisms in place, situational dashboards, daily record keeping that takes place as part of the National Emergency Operations Center mechanism to capture exactly the things that you have talked about, challenges, solutions, policy level issues that are escalated to the Deputy Governor and his team of chief officers to address, also the decisions and the actions that are taken that come out of those meetings, and ongoing debriefings, daily meetings of the NEOC to chart the course for the day, follow-ups, by 1 o'clock that afternoon, they get reported into the Deputy Governor and his team in the policy group. So there definitely is, I think, a good, healthy record of the processes that were undertaken, the challenges encountered, and action plans put in place. And rightly as well, as you've pointed out, areas where things could be strengthened and bolstered to increase our resilience. To that end, hazard management has conducted, I believe to date, 2 debriefing exercises, one with cluster managers from within the NEOC, the other with a broader working group of stakeholders who were actively involved in various aspects of the response and activation. I can undertake to provide for you a date by which a consolidation of the analysis of that work that was done, the challenges, and then any actions to address gaps could be made available if that would be of assistance.
It would, and thanks very much for that answer. And I couldn't help but notice, but I noticed several times I keep hearing Public Health England popping up, but England is a disaster compared to what we have here. I mean, just sort of curiosity, what exactly did Public Health England do? I'm just curious. Sorry, Prabir, you're saying that the politicians in the UK didn't listen to Public Health England? Is that what you're saying? Sorry, I didn't hear you. I just want to record I want to thank Public Health Cayman and the Cayman people for going through this. Take the vote, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, before
All those in favor, member for. All in favor of OE 140, COVID-19 response and recovery for $40 million standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The question was asked of me about the meals. Mr. Chairman, as of November 1st, the hotels will be, they're back up to staff and will be providing the meals. They'll be catered by the hotel, not by outside caterers.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Colleagues, as we move forward to wind up.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I have to interrupt you. It's just been brought to my attention that, an important matter, and I'm seeking the cooperation of honorable members that the package of information that we've presented in obviously the intention of assisting the committee with a large figure of 40 million, that package of information contains some information that I don't want necessarily to even say out now. That contains some confidential information, and I would seek members' cooperation to allow us to get back the information that we've handed out, because it does contain. It contains names of persons, not business places providing vendor services to the government, but names of individuals. As a compromise,
Come on, boys, pass it up. Come on.
Mr. Chairman, as I said, as a compromise, we could get them all back, and if members were insisting on them, we could redact the names.
Come on now, be reasonable. That's why you got it now, you take it back.
Colleagues, there are a number of housekeeping matters that we need to take care of before we conclude this session of Finance Committee. Come on. For the sake of completeness, all items shown on the schedule to bill have been approved, either as they initially appeared on the schedule to the bill or as they were amended during the Finance Committee process. In accordance with Standing Order 64-4, I shall put the question as to whether honourable members approve the schedule as amended in Finance Committee, forming part of the bill. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The schedule, as it has been amended by Finance Committee, now stands part of the bill. Next, we have to consider the clauses in the bill. In accordance with Standing Order 64-5, I shall put the question as whether the honourable members approve of Clause 1 standing part of the bill. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Similarly, I put the question in Clause 2 of the bill. The question is whether honourable members approve of Clause 2 standing or becoming part of the bill. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Clause 2 stands part of the bill. In accordance with Standing Order 64-7, I shall put the question as to whether I, as chairman of the committee, do report the bill to the House. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The bill will be reported to the House. I thank you, honourable members, for your attention and your participation these past few days. Premier, I recognize the Premier. I want to thank members from the HSA, Ms. Yearwood and Ms. Cummings, and Acting Chief Officer from the Ministry for waiting patiently as well. You can be dismissed at this time. Thanks for your input. Colleagues, this concludes the form. And Ms. Dinsbell Powell as well, I'd like to recognize her. Finance Committee proceedings are concluded, but we now need to take a break to allow the clerk and the staff of the House to prepare the appropriate reports and for us to reconvene the Finance Committee to approve the report and the minutes this evening. But I need to have that done before the Legislative Assembly can reconvene and report the bills to the House. The clerk is indicating to me that she will need until about 5 o'clock to have the reports ready. The committee is officially adjourned.